Hey, gang, this week's episode is brought to you by oldschoolshirts.com. Hey, check them out. You like defunct teams and leagues and t-shirt form? Well, you'll find them there, but a whole bunch of other stuff, too. Do you remember a radio station of the past or perhaps a mall that you used to go to? All kinds of great cultural and sports memories can be found at the great folks at oldschoolshirts.com. Promo code GOODSEATS for 10% off all of your purchases. And now, here's our show.
Regularly scheduled programs will not be seen tonight so that we may bring you the College All-Star Football Games.
From Soldier Field in Chicago, Illinois, it's the College All-Stars versus the National Football League champion Pittsburgh Steelers in the 42nd College All-Star Football Game. This ABC Sports Exclusive brought to you by Mutual of New York. Insurance for life, health, and retirement, individual or group, money for the future. By Sears Tire and Auto Centers, home of the Die-Hard battery, and the Sears Road Handler steel-belted radial tire. By Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer, since 1844, the quality has always come through. And by Schick Super 2, the twin-blade cartridge with Teflon that makes closeness comfortable. Well, after a year off, the traditional lid lifter for the football season is back in good health. The College All-Stars against the NFL champions being played as usual in Chicago. And opening at quarterback for the College All-Stars, the number one pick of them all, Steve Bartkowski of California, now the property of the Atlanta Falcons. Another quarterback you'll see tonight, Steve Joachim of Temple, now property of the Baltimore Colts, the total offense leader a year ago in college football. Well, Messrs. Bartkowski and Joachim and the rest of the College All-Stars will have some pressure tonight. From the Steel Curtain, number 68, Elsie Greenwood, 75, Joe Green, 63, Ernie Holmes, and 78, Dwight White. Remember, in the Super Bowl, these people held the Minnesota Vikings to only 17 yards on the ground. Number 32, one of those rare big backs that can fly. Franco Harris gained over 1,000 yards a year ago and was the MVP in the Super Bowl. The Steeler quarterback, Terry Bradshaw, checks in at a sleek 201 pounds for 1975, brimming with the confidence that comes from winning it all. Well, those are just some of the principals you'll be watching tonight. Hello, everybody. I'm Keith Benson. I'll be calling the play for the ball game tonight, and I suppose the foundation for this game rests in the simple fact that the collegians would love to beat the professional champions, but the mere suggestion of it is enough to make the Pittsburgh Steelers dyspeptic.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Well, now, this is interesting. How are you, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon. And this, of course, is Good Seats Still Available, the curious little podcast that's devoted to what used to be in professional sports. I appreciate you finding us. And where were you 51 years ago this week? Some of you, frankly, weren't alive, and God bless you for not being around at that point. You've got plenty of years still ahead of you. But some of us were. And if we were football fans, either of the collegiate or NFL variety, we were probably salivating for when 8 o'clock Central Time hit so that we could turn on our local ABC station in our respective markets to watch the annual, if you will, literal and figurative kickoff to the pro and collegiate football seasons. Yes, this was the College All-Stars versus the NFL champions. It was called the Chicago Charities Football Game, and it was put together by the NFL, the NCAA, and the Chicago Tribune and its charitable arm. Each year is sort of a beginning, an official beginning, a starting pistol, if you will, for the pro and collegiate games to come. And for many years, from 1934 all the way through 1976, this was an annual fair held largely, often at Chicago's Soldier Field. I think it was called Soldiers Field at that time. I don't know. It's always been a malapropism over the decades, but there was definitely a hard S there at the end in some of these games and these clips that we found. But there you heard Keith Jackson for the 1975 version, introducing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who had won the Super Bowl, of course, in 74, and the Collegiate All-Stars, which was usually helmed by a well-known college coach and obviously featured many of the best players of the college game. who were getting ready for their own college football seasons coming up in the months ahead. And it was quite an interesting affair. It was a charitable fundraiser for sure. It was often sold out at Soldier Field. So, we're talking about 50, 60, sometimes 70 or 80,000 fans, depending on the configuration of the stadium over the decades. It was on national television. And remember, there were very few options to watch TV back in that time, right? In the major markets, of course, you had the three major networks and their stations or affiliates, as well as maybe a handful of independent stations. That was it. So this was a big deal. This was a very largely watched game. And of course, people were salivating for the beginning of football like they do today, just as much, perhaps not even more so in the mid-1970s. But Warren Rogan is our guest this week. He is the author of a compelling new book that really just digs deep, long and hard into this game that is, frankly, an asterisk now in pro and college football history. The book is called College All-Stars versus NFL Champions of the Chicago Charities Football Games. And literally, you'll hear in a conversation as well as in this book, we go through all the trials and tribulations of this game. Arch Ward, the well-renowned Chicago sports writer back in the 30s, was instrumental in getting this game up and running, found willing participants in a fledgling pro game in the 1930s and the then dominant college game. And what better way to raise money for charity than by seeing the best of both of these entities play each other at the beginning of their respective seasons. And for decades, this was a big deal. And obviously with ABC covering the game as the 1960s rolled into the 1970s, it just got bigger and bigger each year. However, as we'll talk about with Warren in a few minutes, you'll hear some of the not only the highlights and the interesting scenarios and idiosyncratic events that occurred during the course of this game, including, by the way, its very last game in 1976, which we'll get to, which essentially, for many different reasons, doomed it to collapse. You'll hear in the conversation that by the late 1960s or so, as the NFL was getting bigger, having merged with the AFL, the Super Bowl becoming a thing, the beginnings of questioning around this game's existence, why it should be, why risk injury, especially in the beginning of the season or before even the beginning of the season, things that we know now to be non-starters, right? Exhibitions and the like. Hell, players even, they don't even play all-star games anymore for the very simple reason of not wanting to risk injury, et cetera. And it was clear that these kinds of things were starting to crop up already, and people were questioning why this game was had. But like I said, it was a monster television event every summer, and the crowds were certainly coming to see it. So we'll get into sort of the why it was so successful, why it started to wane, and of course, it's a rather dubious end. We'll have a couple of clips of that too. If you're not familiar with the 1976 version of this game, stay tuned because you're going to find out. and the clips on YouTube are just, let's put it this way, wild. Let's leave it at that. The book, again, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions, it is available now wherever you get good books. Of course, you can get it through our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode with myself and Warren. That's numbered 455, I think this episode number is. And you'll find a couple of convenient links to our friends at Amazon where you'll get the book as fast as humanly possible, either in paperback or Kindle version. And of course, we get a couple of shekels of referral love when you do so. And we appreciate you considering purchasing the book that way. You can also find the links in whatever show description your podcast feeder has delivered for you in this episode. The links are right there too. So go for it there too. Just however you get the book, just get it, because you're going to find it to be just extraordinarily fascinating, as hopefully you will be wedded to do so in this conversation. Coming up at you now. Here's my chat with Warren that we had a couple of months back. We were kind of holding it off until the inklings of preseason football were around the corner, and when the book, of course, was available. And so we are privileged to bring this conversation to you now. Please, as always, enjoy. So this is a topic that's a quintessential thing that we love to kind of obsess about here on this show, right? So not only teams and leagues and all that kind of stuff, but like events and things that, people absolutely remember, will probably get into a fist fight because others don't remember it and clearly think it's made up. But it's part of the fabric of sports history and stuff. So how about a little bit of background about you and how you come into this particular story? You've got some other, you got a whole bunch of football sort of things in your wheel of interest, don't you?
Yeah. So first of all, Tim, thanks for having me on. I'm like you, a sports historian. I love football. I've done, I host a podcast as well called Sports Forgotten Heroes, and have
Which we
had.
highly recommend, by the way. It's a little less regular than ours is, but then again, it's also, you could argue it's of higher quality, but feel free to check that out if you haven't, friends, and put that in your podcast feed, because
Yeah,
that'll help both of our algorithms, but I digress.
absolutely. I mean, you're weekly. I'm not weekly, and but you have a great podcast as too. I listen to it all the time, and I was thrilled when you reached out to have me on. So yeah, I've done a lot of work in football. My background, uh, I used to work for the NHL. I worked at a all sports network called Sports News Network. It was around in the early 1990s. We were the predecessor to ESPN News, and when CNN had a 24-hour sports network as well. So I love sports. I love football. I love baseball. I love them all. One of my goals in my life was to write a book. But I didn't want to write a book about Babe Ruth or Mickey Mantle or Jim Brown or Wayne Gretzky. I mean, everybody writes about those guys. And I wanted to write a book about something that I wanted to learn about, that I had interest in, and that not too many other people have ever written about. And I got to be honest, in my research, looking for a topic to write about, there's hardly anything written about the Chicago Charities Football Games. And I was really fascinated by that because, wow, what a history. I mean, and how this came about, the man behind it, the games themselves, how the NFL really needed this way more than college football. College football at the time was the sport, was as far as football is concerned, it was the sport. People frowned upon professional football players. You're going to go play professional football? That's not an honorable thing to do. And the NFL really needed this game, this exhibition game, and it really helped propel the NFL's popularity back then.
So a couple of things to unpack there. Number one, it's the old Toni Morrison rule, right? If you don't see a book that you're looking for, you got to write it. And that's what you've done. Now, again, we love that because this is, as you're saying, and we're going to get into some of the specifics of this, right? This was a very vibrant thing for a number of decades, right? And we'll talk about its popularity and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But before we go further on that, the Sports News Network thing is a very dimly lit memory of mine. I remember this was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, a cable channel. I know CNNSI and ESPN News were kind of clamoring, and this was, but this was from the Mizlou.
Exactly.
Right?
It was the Mizlou Sports News Network. And we signed on the air in 1991, I think it was.
I think it was 1989. It was 89, and it dissolved in 90. It was about a year old, right?
No, it was definitely in the 1990s for sure, early 1990s, without a doubt. But it was either 90 or 91. And we started off, we had temporary studios in the USA Today building in Roslyn, Virginia.
Right across the river from my old stomping grounds at Georgetown University as an undergrad. How about
Exactly.
that?
Exactly. Those two towers, those two buildings are still there. And we were there for several months before we moved into our permanent home up in North Brunswick or New Brunswick, New Jersey. We were there for a couple of months. And my gosh, I mean, we could do an entire podcast about this, but it was a very sad thing. Uh, I'm not going to mention names, but the gentleman who owned the Mizlu network, who owned us, he sold us or had a deal in place with another big media company that is still out there, and in the end, at the end, he there was a little haggling going on with the price and some things that he said had to be included in the sale of Sports News Network that this other media company did not want to be a part of. And he said, well, if you don't take this, then the deal's off. And the way I understand it, the lawyers closed up their books, packed up their briefcases, and walked out. And that was the end of us. And 24 hours later, there was no such thing anymore as Sports News Network, and we were all unemployed. It was really sad, a bitter end to something that had great potential, and we know it had great potential because there's ESPN News came after Sports News Network. Um, and after that, I went to work. I went back to work at a newspaper as a staff sports writer. And then I ended up on the ground floor for the launch of the Golf Channel, where I ultimately became the senior producer of the instructional unit. And I produced all of the old content for a show called Golf Channel Academy. And I produced and directed all the shows for David Ledbetter and Jim McClain and Jim Flick and Dave Pels. Just it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot of great golf. And funny thing is, I listened to Ledbetter say this, I listened to McClain say that, and I listened to Flick say this. I was a pretty good golfer, and I got to the point where I couldn't pull the trigger anymore. I didn't know how to swing the club because I had too many thoughts running through my head because this guy said do it this way, and this guy said do it that way. And yeah, so I've had quite the history in sports media.
Very, very interesting. All right. Well, if you ever want to double click on that Sports News Network thing, already got a ton of questions for you on that. All right. So, given all that background in sports, though, how does the NFL and the college All-Star game become, I don't know, your muse, if you will, to get a book out for the first time in your life?
Well, like I said, I wanted to write about something that has very little coverage or no one else had written about. And I follow all sports. I grew up in the New York area. I'm a tortured New York Mets fan. I grew up loving the New York Giants as well, the New York Rangers, and the New York Knicks. I'd probably say people ask me all the time, well, which one is your favorite? And I would say whichever one is in season. I love them all the same. Uh, but yeah, I really enjoy watching the Giants in when they won their first two Super Bowls back in '86 and then again in '91 and then obviously 2007, 2011. And I just love all sports, and I read about all the sports all the time. And I always say that everybody has somewhat of a photographic memory. You have a photographic memory in things that you find incredibly interesting. And for me, it certainly doesn't help my pocketbook, but uh, when it comes to sports, I see something and I remember it. And I just have an aptitude for recalling sports history. So I looked through different things to write about, And certain things just stick with me. I remember the first time I ever discovered the Steagles, right? When the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Philadelphia Eagles combined for one season, and they were called the Steagles. And I remember, wow, how interesting is that? That two NFL teams combined to field a team because they were both, their rosters were affected by the war, and neither one could field a full team. So they
Yeah,
got
one of our
together.
first episodes with Matt Algeo
Yeah.
talking about that phenomenon, right? It's just, but lost to history, right? Unless you're a really deep fan of either of the two teams that currently go soldier on now, right? But it's like this was a thing.
And exactly. And then the following year, when the Eagles were able to field a team, the Steelers still couldn't. And the Chicago Cardinals, the oldest team in professional football, the oldest team in the NFL is not the Chicago Bears. It's not the Green Bay Packers. It's the Arizona Cardinals. Most people don't know that. Yes, the Arizona Cardinals are the oldest team in the NFL. Before they were in Arizona, they were in St. Louis, and before they were in St. Louis, they were in Chicago. They predate the Bears and the Packers. Well, the Chicago Cardinals couldn't field a team the following year after the Eagles couldn't field a team, and the Steelers still couldn't field a team. So for one season, the Cardinals and the Steelers combined, and they became Cards Pit. And my gosh, probably the worst team in the history of the NFL. But it's things like that. So you research, you write, you research. As you are, Tim, a terrific host of a really good podcast. Um, you read and you research different sports and the history of the games, and I do the same thing. And I vaguely remember watching some of these games when I was much younger, obviously. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember that series. And I started looking things up. I'm like, how come no one has ever written about this? And then I started to do more research and I said, my gosh, look at all the stuff that is in here about the college all-stars, how they form that team, why there was a game, the people, the stars who participated in the game, how many fans. They played the sold out stadium. Soldier Field was sold out almost for every single one of these games. Um, Otto Graham ended up coaching for 10 years. He took 10 times he was the coach of the team. You were only supposed to be able to play if you were on the college side one time. Basically, what they did was they took the team was made up of a bunch of seniors who had just graduated college and were either going into the private sector or were going to pursue an NFL career, and they got together for a couple of 2 or 3 weeks up in I think it was Northwestern University, and they would practice. And in 3 weeks, they would gel as best they could, and they would play the defending NFL champion, later the Super Bowl champion. And my gosh, at first, the first couple of games, college teams held their ground. They were pretty good. And if you consider in the 44 games that were played, or the 42 games that were played, colleges won 9 times, most of them in the early going. And I believe there were 2 ties. They were won a quarter of the games. That's pretty amazing, especially when we say today there is no way a college team can beat an NFL team. I have this argument all the time with people that, well, if you took the college football champion and you played the worst NFL team, there's no way the NFL team could beat the college football champion. Yeah, you know what? The worst NFL team is still made up of the best players from college football teams, whereas the college football champion maybe has, a handful of guys who will ever play in the NFL. So, but in the beginning, the college all-stars held their ground against the NFL champions and won their share of games all the way up until 1963, the last time when they beat the Green Bay Packers in 1963, and Vince Lombardi was none too pleased, and that was the last time the college football all-stars beat the NFL champions. But there were a couple of occasions when a few players actually played more than one time for the college all-stars, and again, it was because of the war. And for instance, Charlie Trippi played for the All-Stars, I believe it was 5 times.
Sounds like NIL, but that's I digress.
Yeah.
Well, let me back up for a second, because one of the major themes that you sort of established before getting into the nitty gritty of the games and the stats and the history, and we'll talk about the ending of it all, because that's a story in and of itself.
Yeah.
Is this sort of, and we've explored this too in the early 30s, right? 1930s, right? This whole idea of quote unquote pro football was so nascent and so fragile and so not even close, not even a dream of where we are today.
Sure.
The college game was really everything, right? And there were major teams that were known around the country as being supreme college football teams, but the pro game had a very choppy sort of starting point. And in some respects, this is almost an outgrowth, this game of, let's put it this way, looking back, you would think, oh, this is something that the NFL kind of just concocted to kind of, but it feels to me like it's almost like the college was actually almost the rationale or the leverage, if you will, to create this game. That's the one that's the entity that had the most heat, not this fledgling NFL.
Yeah, basically what happened was in 1933, you had your World's Fair in Chicago, the Chicago World's Fair, and they put on this great event the first year to attract people. It was called the Major League Baseball All-Star Game, and it was organized by a gentleman by the name of Arch Ward, who was the sports editor of the Chicago Tribune. And as we know, it wound up being a huge hit. I mean, the guys that played in that first All-Star game, Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb, I mean, you had the cream of the crop coming out to Chicago to play in the All-Star game. Well, it was such a hit that, it's still played today. The second year that the World's Fair was still going on, and they wanted to do another big event. And they went back to Arch Ward and they said, Arch, what else you got? And he thought about it, and he called his good buddy, George Hallis, to talk about what can we do? And they came up with this idea to create a one-time football exhibition pitting a group of college, guys who had just graduated college, they just finished their senior year of college, against the defending NFL champions. At that time, that year, the defending NFL champion was the Chicago Bears. And they played this game at Soldier Field, and they announced this game in the newspaper, and they let people from all over the country vote for who they wanted to see play for the college all-stars. And they got I think it was well over 1 million votes. And they even voted for whoever, for the coach. And forgive me, I can't remember, who the coach was for the first game. But it was Noble Kaiser from Purdue. And
Two people were yelling into their devices for that, but that's probably about it. So congratulations on getting that one right.
But they uh, put this game together. It was a hit, and the game ended in a 0-0 tie. But it was such a hit, they decided, you know what? Let's do this again. And they
Why,
did it.
why do you think it was a hit? Because Hallis kind of lent his credibility and the team to it. I mean, you could make the
Yeah.
argument that without an NFL team, early days as it might have been, this thing would have been harder.
Well, part of it was an opportunity for people. If you're on the East Coast, you didn't know much about the West Coast players. And if you're on the West Coast, you didn't know much about the East Coast players. So it was an opportunity for people in Chicago to see players they had never seen before. Sure, they saw guys from Illinois and players from Northwestern, from Big Ten schools, but they'd never seen players from, you know, I forget what it was called at the time, the Pac 8 and the Big 8, guys from Army and places like that. They'd never seen it. So the game had a natural attraction to be able to see players they had never seen before, and they were rooting them on. Again, college football was the game. The Bears won the NFL, and at that time, the NFL was still playing in some pretty small cities. There weren't, there was no teams in Florida. There were no teams out in California. There were no teams in Texas. This was really a northern, mostly northeastern game. And but people loved college football. And to be able to see the best college football players on the field at the same time, it was a big deal. And for the most part, that's who the fans wanted to see win the game.
Well, wasn't this kind of also a bit of an unbeknownst referendum, if you will, on the pro game? Because, I mean, you could make the argument that House is kind of making a bet here that, I mean, he's bringing the Bears into this mixture, which is obviously popular in Chicago, but the NFL is still you say it's still kind of a regionally known thing,
Well,
not big
right.
markets, that kind of thing, right? So it's kind of a
Well,
risk there to maybe be, like, what if the college all-stars whoop our asses, if you will? I mean, that could kill the whole pro game right there, right?
Well, yeah. So for that was the deal for the colleges, what I just spoke about. For the NFL, this was an important game because this gave the NFL a a national stage in front of writers, sports writers across the country. Everybody thought that the college game and the college players were so much better than the NFL players. So this gave the NFL a chance to prove its worth and prove to people that the NFL game was really a good game. Now, they did play by the college rules to start off with. And the first couple of games, the colleges really held their own. Like I said, the first game was a nothing tie. The second game, the New York Giants, were supposed to be the opponent, but travel and all made it a little difficult. So the Bears ended up playing in that second game as well, and they actually won the game 5-0. So the NFL had the edge after two games, winning one and tying one. And then the All Stars tied that third game. It was a 7-7 tie, and they won the fourth game 6-0, and they won the fifth game 28-0. So this was a hard thing for the NFL to accept, the fact that they're losing to the All-Stars. But then the tide started to turn. It started to turn, and the NFL started to win games beginning in 1939 when the Giants beat the All-Stars 9-0. the tide started to turn. So this game, Hallis knew the importance of the game to help prove that the NFL product was really a good product and that it was better than the college game. And after a couple of years, they really started to prove that. The NFL needed this game to prove its worth.
Right. So tell me about how Ward is sort of setting all this up, and frankly, how does he make this into an event? Right. You obviously mentioned the 0-0 tie, and actually, it was actually more interesting than the score might sort of hint at or indicate. But what's behind all of this? Is that there's a charity element to it, but there's also a lot of
Yeah.
pomp and circumstance too. Probably not all of it at the very beginning, but tell me sort of like how Ward is sort of shaping this to become, because he's got to promote the heck out of this thing, right? And it's the people are not just going to show up just because there are two teams playing, right? I mean, there's a lot of other stuff that kind of there's a build up to it.
Right. Well, Arch Ward was at his core, he was a promoter. Before he ever went to the Chicago Tribune, he was a marketing, a PR guy at Notre Dame, working with Newt Rockne and promoting the Notre Dame brand. He was a promoter. He also created Golden Gloves boxing. I mean, the guy was a promoter at his core. He's the founder basically of the All America Football Conference. The guy just knew how to do things. So he was able and he knew of the importance of the game for the NFL as well. And he, Hallis was after him after that first game. We got to do it again. We got to do it again. We got to keep football, the NFL brand, the NFL name in the public's eye to help promote our game and help make it um, what ultimately what it is today. We need to continue promoting, promoting, promoting. So one of the things that Arch Ward did was he involved the public. And until World War II came around, until all of that, every year this was promoted through papers across the country. Vote for your favorite college football player, guy who has just graduated to play in the college charities, the Chicago Charities College All-Star game against the defending NFL champion. See if the college game is really better than the pro game. And yeah, they got millions of people involved in this, and sports writers from across the country came to cover this game. So it became a really big deal. And then the radio broadcasting it across the country, became a really big deal. And then finally, when TV hit in about 1950, I think it was, it became a real big deal. So Arch Ward was behind the promotion of it, but it actually outgrew Arch Ward. And, I can't, I wrote the book. It's funny how books work. You write the book and then it takes a year for it to be published. So you don't recall everything. But this game became a big deal. I spoke with one of the head researchers at the NFL, guy by the name of Chris Willis. You might have had him on your show as well. He talked to me about how this was like the Super Bowl is today. This was appointment television. People looked forward to it. This caught the country's fancy. And every year to launch the NFL exhibition season, this game was appointment watching. And they came from all over the country to watch this game.
What about the charity element? How does that fit in?
So that's really an interesting thing. The game was created to help benefit local Chicago charities, and it raised a couple of $1 million. You would think that it would have raised a lot more money. It's really hard to do the math, but the conversion of how much a dollar raised back then is compared to a dollar raised today. But charities did benefit from it. Children's charities, hospital charities, goodwill charities. There were several charities that benefited from the game, but of course you needed sponsors and all that to put this game on.
But this was okay. So these were a bunch of charities. They rotated. Was it?
No, it
Was
was
there
a bunch
bidding
of
for them?
charities split every year. They weren't rotated, and it wasn't necessarily the same charity every year either.
And this was a game that was solely centered in Chicago, right? It never really kind of left the city, right?
It never left Chicago. Every game but two were played at Soldier Field, and the two that weren't played at Soldier Field, it happened during the war, and they moved the game again. I think it was to Northwestern University for 2 seasons.
So as the years sort of pile on and stuff, right? I mean, you're talking about large crowds. It's quite the event. It's a lot of pomp and circumstance. In many respects, this feels like it was almost a validation of football from both sides, but with probably more substantially helpful to the burgeoning pro game, right? Because it was giving them,
100%.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
so give us some background on that too, because I mean, in many respects, you could make the argument that despite the risk, you could make the argument that the NFL really had nothing to lose in the 1930s. But as the
well,
years went on, right, and maybe coming out of the war, maybe this was the ultimate proof point that there's something beyond college here for people interested in football.
yeah. I mean, the NFL needed the game, especially in the beginning. As the years went on, it became obvious that the NFL did not need the game as much. I'd say the tide probably really started to turn in the 1950s, especially after the famous Colts Giants game. It really the NFL took off, as we know. But up until that point, the NFL needed this. The publicity the NFL got and the validation that the NFL game got from playing in this game was immeasurable. And when you say risk, it's really interesting because part of what I wrote about in the book was the risk that the NFL players were taking by playing in the game, especially after, the 1930s turned into the 40s and the 1940s turned into the 1950s. It became somewhat of a risk for NFL players to play in this game. Gosh, if you suffered a serious injury, a career-ending injury, for many of these guys, this was before they they signed their contracts with their NFL teams, and if they got hurt, oh well, tough luck. So as the years went on, agents and players and agents and even some of the coaches and owners of the NFL teams that were playing in the game frowned upon their stars from playing in the game, and they didn't want their rookies who were playing for the college all-star team to play in the game because they hadn't signed their contract yet with their NFL team. And like I said, if they got hurt, it became a big risk. And there were players that got hurt. One of them was Roger Staubach. But he survived the injury because he had to go serve in the Navy, and didn't end up playing for the Cowboys for a couple years after. But there are instances that I talk about in this book of players who were injured in this game, pro and rookies. And like I said, like even Mean Joe Green, he never played in the game because it was too much of a risk. Paul Warfield suffered a terrible injury with the Browns and ended up missing quite a bit of time with the Browns. There are significant injuries that happened in this game that cost rookies, guys who were going to play on the college all-star team, who they played for the college all-stars and they got hurt and they missed time with their pro team. And then there were pro players who got hurt in this exhibition game who ended up missing good portions of their season with their NFL teams. So there was a risk as the years went on.
So let's talk about the timing then. This game was usually in
August. It was
called
the first. It was the first game of the exhibition season. The exhibition season was launched with this game.
So it's almost like the Hall of Fame game in some respects in terms of timing. It's the first thing out of the chute for both but the college all-stars. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. How was how was each all-star team each year put together? It seems like this kind of a loose kind of how is it determined? Who determines it? Is it the AP? Is it official? Is it unofficial? That kind of stuff. Because it's also these guys are also, to your point earlier, right? Some of them have probably graduated already, or probably have less contact with the game in preparation than say the pro teams do, because at least they've had training camp for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so the way it worked, like I said, up until the early 1940s, when World War II, when we got pulled into World War II, until that time, the players were voted onto the team by the public. And there was a little bit of maneuvers behind the scenes too, with coaches and all. But for the most part, the players were voted onto the team by the public, and the criteria was you had to have just graduated college. So you were between your college football season and walking into your NFL training camp. So that's the way it started off. And then the war happened, and at that point, the coach of the college team and a couple of game officials, we'll call them, selected the players, and ultimately that's what happened from the mid 1940s until the end of the game, until the end of the series. The players were selected by the coaches. The coaches in the beginning were also voted on by the fans. So like Noble Kaiser and guys like that, Frank Armstrong and Lee Leahy and all those guys, they were voted by the fans to become the coach of the team. So those coaches were handed the players and said, these are your players for the team. And they would get together in Chicago for about 2 to 3 weeks, try to gel and put a team together, gel, and pretty basic strategies to go up against NFL teams that were used to playing with each other. Even though they were only in camp for a couple, 2 or 3 weeks, they still pretty much knew the system that they were playing under. So the college team was at somewhat of a disadvantage when it comes to strategy. So eventually, Otto Graham became the coach after he played in the series. He became the coach of the team for, I think it was like 10 straight years he coached the team. So he got into a rhythm. He knew what it took to put a team together this quickly. And again, he was part of the decision process at that time of selecting which players to come out to the team. And they were all seniors getting ready to go to their NFL camp. And by the way, they played with the college all-stars before they ever entered their NFL camp.
Very interesting. It's stunning though to see in your book, and you look at some of the other resources out there about just the crowds for these games. I mean, after the war is over, I mean, even during the war, I mean, you had crowds of 90, 100,000 back in Soldier Field was gargantuan, and to see even as Soldier Field sort of gets renovated and updated and stuff, it's still, according to the stats, I mean, if you believe the stats, I mean, you're talking about gigantic crowds, even through the 70s. I mean, this was still almost, if not a full sellout, pretty darn close to it each and every year. So a couple of, let's talk about some of the sort of outliers to this, right? So you're mentioning the game and obviously how it kind of gave the NFL its essentially its credibility and stuff. But over time, right, as the series goes into the 50s and 60s and certainly into the 70s until it collapses, the NFL does pretty darn good. I mean, it's essentially it's the NFL's games, and 1963, as you mentioned, was the last time the college all-stars won. It's pretty clear that the pro side is taking it pretty seriously. But is it also an indication that really the collegiate kind of construct just wasn't nearly as good as a pro team that kind of has, preseason going for it and an establishment of an organization going to it, right? They're clearly separating themselves in terms of the skill.
Yeah, as the years went on and the NFL started to gain popularity and started to gain acceptance, and they started to leave these smaller cities, and money started to become a bigger. They started to play the game and commit themselves to playing football and being part of the team year round. The NFL certainly started to separate itself from the the college all-stars. Again, the all-stars, there's a bunch of guys from 20, 30 different schools, whatever it is, coming together for 3 weeks to try and learn a system and take on the NFL champions. The NFL champions, you look at some of those great Packer teams, the Bears teams, the Giants, the Eagles of the early 50s. These teams, they didn't have a lot of turnover, and these guys knew their systems, and they were becoming bigger and faster and quicker as the years went on, and they trained year round, and they knew their systems, and it was pretty tough for a team that had been together for 3 weeks to go in and beat the Chicago Bears and Green Bay Packers and teams like that, that are coached by George Halas, that are coached by Vince Lombardi. And the NFL players, once this game really took off and the NFL had gained its popularity, they didn't want to lose to a bunch of college guys. It was embarrassing. They did not want to lose to them. And so they took the game seriously. And when Vince Lombardi lost in 1963, 20-17, he was not happy at all. And he wanted his revenge. And he finally got that revenge, in 1966. He told his boys, there is no way we are losing this game. And what they do, they went out and they won 38-0. And then the Packers won the NFL again the following year, and they won 27-0. And then they won again the next year, and they won 34-17. The NFL didn't want to lose. And it's not like they were going up against a bunch of pansies either. But the college team had only been together for 2 or 3 weeks trying to learn a system, and again, a simplified system. Now, every year they would name an MVP of the game, and the MVP was always someone from the college team. So it was basically who was the most valuable player in the game from the college. That's who was named the MVP. And you look at some of the names. You had Billy Kilmer, John Hadle, Charlie Taylor, Bubba Smith, Larry Zonka. I mean, you had some, Babe Parilli. You had some really, John Brody, some really big names that played for the college all-stars. But they couldn't match up eventually with their NFL counterparts.
All right, so tell me, as the years roll on and into the late 60s, early 70s, when maybe there's the first sort of inklings of why are we still kind of playing this game given the risk and stuff? But I mean, aside from the big crowds and stuff, and it's obviously a popular way to literally and figuratively kick off the football season with television and stuff, right? It's always exciting when the season starts all over again. What's compelling both the antecedents to the NCAA and the NFL to continue doing this? I mean, what are we getting out of this, especially when, is it PR for the charity? Is it just a great
It was for
tradition, laziness? What?
Tradition, and whatever money they could raise for the charity. That's really what it was. And towards the end of the series, it became pretty obvious that the NFL had outgrown this thing, between players not wanting to play anymore, the complete dominance of the game. It just wasn't a good game anymore. It wasn't a good exhibition anymore. Despite the tradition of the game, the NFL had outgrown the game. And it really became apparent as the 60s came along. I mean, you look at these scores, like I told you, let's just go down the final couple of games. 65, the Browns won 24-16. Then it was Green Bay 38-0, 27-0, 34-17. The Jets once won a Super Bowl. The Jets were once a decent team. They won 26-24. Then it was the Chiefs 24-3, the Colts 24-17, the Cowboys 20-7. The Dolphins 14-3. Then in 74, there wasn't a game because of the NFL strike. And previous to that, there almost wasn't a game because the NFL was on a holdout, but they ultimately came to a decision and played the game. Then the Steelers won 21-14 in 75. And at that point, they're really the crowds were not as interested in the game. It wasn't a sellout. And the final game, 1976, the Steelers were just thumping the All-Stars. It was 24-0, I believe, at halftime. The skies opened up. This huge rainstorm came.
There's literally hundreds of people out on the field now, sliding around. They're enjoying what's happening. It's going to be awfully hard to get control again and get them all off the field because it's very hard to identify them. Got the Steelers going to the sideline. And I would suspect that the Steelers are, oh, wow, here comes one, maybe. I think you'll probably be able to hear this one. I think we better get a little delay in the game, even though by football rules you're not supposed to. That took 3 seconds. Speed of sound, what, 720? That was 1,400 feet away. We got both teams wisely going to the dressing rooms. We're not going to lose anybody to the lightning. An unbelievable thunderstorm. The Steelers out in front of the All-Stars, 24-0, 1:22 remaining in the third quarter. And you can hear the crash and roar of the thunder. I have no idea what we're going to do. We'll stay with you and try and let you know what's happening. And what we are looking at is... I tell you, I'm from Oklahoma, Frank, and this could look like tornado, believe me. You can see those things flying by. As wild as it looks on your monitor, believe me, it's even much more wild than that.
Unfortunately, there were a lot of rowdy fans there. They stormed the field, and at that point, Pete Rozelle just looked around and told everybody, look, it's not even a competitive game anymore. People are going to get hurt. There's a lot of risk for people, for the players to be playing in this. There's just no more point in playing this game. I understand the charities, we're going to take a hit because we're not going to be able to, they're not going to get the benefit of the dollars raised, but there's just no point in playing this game anymore.
Well, I don't want to end on a negative note, but I do want to kind of go double click on that because there is, I mean, the YouTube video of this, people have to remember this is 1976, right? It's August. And in the storm that you're talking about is just, it's almost cataclysmic how quickly it develops and how torrential the
Oh,
rains were. It was impossible, absolutely impossible to play. And you want to take a break, right? But it's still on national television. There's time to fill. And poor Frank Gifford and his crowd and his booth mates there.
It's an unbelievable downpour here in Chicago. Recap the scoring. Gerald, 3 field goals. There was a safety with the ball being snapped over the punter's head for the All-Stars. Harris went in on a draw play. Riemann scores from 2 yards out. That's the scoring, 24-0. The Pittsburgh Steelers, the champions of the National Football League, with the Super Bowl win over Dallas last January. And the All-Stars.
Goalposts are down at one end of the field, Frank. The young men that have moved out on the field have taken the south goalpost down. So that's going to make it a little tough if we do resume play. And I expect some of them will maybe move up to the other end of the field.
That's the goalpost is gone. One of the bars being carried off the field by a group of young people. One really kind of has to wonder how far we're going to go. And I don't know how in the world they'll get this game resumed.
It's fun to watch as television. I got to think both at the time as well as now. I mean, you could not have picked, I think, a more emblematic way to end all of this, because if there was grousing about this before and uncertainty about the value of this game going forward, I mean, if you're looking for any excuse, I mean, within 3 minutes of this storm, you recognize that there's not much future for this game.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was the NFL the NFL had talked about possibly ending this before, because there was just really nothing in it for the NFL anymore. Really wasn't a whole lot in it for the colleges. Again, it was about tradition, and it was about raising money for charity, which is a good cause, right? Raising money for charity. What's wrong with that? But the game, it just didn't serve a purpose anymore outside of that, outside of the entertainment factor. But even that was sort of going away because of how dominant the NFL had become. You know, and you talk about not wanting to end this on a negative note. You're right. You don't want to end this on a negative note. You talk about some of the guys who played in this game. Gerald Ford. We had a president play in this game. Byron Whizzer White, right? We had a Supreme Court justice play in this game. Alan Page, Minnesota's, Supreme Court. Burgess Owens, Alex Karras, Bertie Casey, right? A really good actor. Merlin Olsen. You know, he was such a dominant player for the Rams, but before he played for the Rams, he played for the College All-Stars and later went on to have a really good Hollywood career. Rosie Greer, Bubba Smith. I mean, there were some serious people who played in this game. This game has such a history. There's CIA involvement in this game. The first ever game televised was the commentator for that game was Alan Skip Waltz, and he was a really good athlete, and he was an intelligence officer for the Navy, and later worked as a recruiter for the CIA when he was coaching crew at Yale University. You know, some of the guys after Skip Waltz that called the game, Jack Brickhouse, Red Grange, Russ Hodges, Kurt Gowdy, Chris Schenkel, Keith Jackson, you mentioned Gifford, Howard Cosell, Don Meredith. This game was on ABC. This was must-watch television until it wasn't.
So it seems like a lot of this theme is almost as a backstory, if you will, to the maturation, the growing up, if you will, of the National Football League, right? From its earliest shaky days, being a sort of a somewhat hollow competitor to the very dominant college game, and in many respects, is almost like a microcosm of the juxtaposition of those two. I mean, you can make the argument that college is now even stronger than ever, given the NIL money and all that kind of stuff. But it's a whole nother. The reality is that this just shows, and really, it's just almost like a mirror to how the NFL essentially grew way beyond the earliest sort of formation of this game, and what its roots were really all about.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider when the NFL first came along, they weren't in, like I said, these big cities. You were in Akron, you were in Hammond, Indiana, you were in,
Careful, Hammond, Indiana
Decatur.
may make a comeback, but I digress.
Yeah, yeah. You were in Decatur, you were in Muncie, you were in Canton. They didn't have teams. Like I said, the oldest team in the NFL, Chicago Cardinals, the Arizona Cardinals. They were one of the ones in the big cities. After that, it took a while for the NFL to get out of those small cities and get into places like New York and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And, they were in Boston and then Washington, you know. So the NFL really needed this game and the colleges, which was such a big game back in the 30s, the 20s, the 30s. And the NFL needed this game to help grow its game. And once the NFL started to grow its game, it really started to outgrow the necessity for this college football all-star game.
All right, then. So let's put this all in perspective. What is the legacy of this game, and where frankly does it sit? Right. I mean, how much or how little does the NCAA and or the NFL know, remember, point to, memorialize, and even where physically? Are there any sort of physical remnants and historical objects, if you will, from any of this anywhere?
In Canton, Ohio, at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, there's some artifacts, but as far as a legacy of this game, I don't know if there is really much of a legacy from the standpoint of people don't talk about this game anymore. Part of the reason why I wrote the book. It's forgotten, right? It's, for whatever reason, it faded away. Nobody really ever talks about this anymore. We talk about some of the great events in sports history. 1960, Mazeroski's home run, Bobby Thompson's home run, Babe Ruth's called shot, the championship game between the Colts and the Giants, the greatest game ever played. We talk about a lot of those games, the great Oklahoma and Nebraska football games, Army and Navy games, every single year. We talk about the great Notre Dame teams from Rockney and all that. Nobody says, do you remember the college football all-star game? Do you remember that when the NFL played the college all-stars? It faded away. And I'd like to think that it faded away because of the NFL dominance. It just became a one-sided affair. Had it remained competitive, and even if they had ended the game, the series, if the series had remained competitive, I think it would have a much better legacy. But, after 1963, that's what, the final 13 games, the NFL won all of them. It was just an event that lost its meaning. At least that's my view.
So is there any commemorations that you discovered along the way that either the league or the NCAA or whatever has there been any sort of nod to it at any time that you know of, a halftime remembrance or a banner somewhere or just any kind of recognition at all, or has it just basically been swept under the carpet?
I think it's basically been swept under the carpet. I don't know of any commemoration, any talk about it. Again, I hang in circles with a lot of sports fans, and I go, "Oh yeah, I remember that game. Whatever happened to that? Why did they end it? It just ended." I think it has to do with the way it ended. It ended in such, you know, a rainstorm at halftime ended the game. It sort of went out with a thud
On national television to boot.
on national television. What a shame. It ended with a thud instead of something great happened in the last game. And, despite something great happening, it was time to end the game. No, that's not the way it ended. It ended with a rainstorm and a bunch of rowdy fans rushing the field.
All right, here's my last question, and I'll let you come. So, in this world of NIL and private equity now having portions of NFL teams and their ownership structure, and sports now, big sports pro and amateur and everything in between seemingly becoming an asset class. And I don't know, by the way, these gigantic valuations and stuff, we'll see how long this sort of era lasts. But in this heady time that we have this conversation, it seems to me like there is no shortage of money and chutzpah to maybe bring this game idea back again, right? With all the attendant, insurances and assurances, right, of player health and that kind of stuff. But in a world where college kids get paid now and could make NIL money with this kind of thing, and the NFL, looking to, I don't know, maybe use as an excuse for an international game to add to their budding global domination approach to life. Do you ever think that something like this, modernly constructed, could come back again?
I don't know. First of all, while this series was going on, this was the biggest one of the time. But during these exhibition seasons, there were other college all-star teams that would play exhibition games against NFL teams. It just didn't have the national prominence, the national spotlight on them, and they weren't yearly. It wasn't a yearly series like this was. I think the problem with resurrecting such a game is partially the risk. Teams do not want their prized possessions, we'll call them, their prized rookies, could you imagine if there was a college football all-star game today and Fernando Mendoza was the quarterback and Leonard Williams sacked him from the Seattle Seahawks, sacked him, and Mendoza tore a ligament or something like that? You think the Raiders are going to risk something like that happening? There's no way. The money involved in professional sports there's just too much to risk. Now, could he take out an insurance policy on himself? God forbid something did happen, but the NFL team would be so severely affected by the loss of their top stars that were just drafted, they wouldn't be able to recover from it. I don't think there's a world in which we can see something like this happening again.
How about the UFL?
I would say you would still run the same risk. Now, I think for the UFL, obviously, it would be a great thing for them for their popularity. And the cool thing for that is it would happen based off of when the UFL season starts. It would happen immediately after the college football season. So the college kids would technically still be in shape, right? But again, the risk, if a player on the college team, or for that matter, the UFL team, got hurt, season-ending injury, a career-ending injury, would it have been worth it? For the college kid, I would probably say no. For the UFL, yeah, this could be a really big deal to help its popularity and see if they are better than a group of great college football players. I think it would be a terrific thing for them. But again, the risk factor is just humongous.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. You could be for the undrafted NFL draft.
That would be interesting if you got.
It's like another tryout, right? It's like another collegiate all-star game, essentially.
Yeah, if you got these undrafted after the draft is over, and you got a team of undrafted free agents to go up against the defending UFL champion or a team of UFL all-stars, that would actually probably be a cool thing to do.
All right, many thanks to Warren. And before I promote the book yet again, I want to remind you that Warren has a wonderful podcast out there. If you're interested in these kinds of topics and more, you need to check out and add to your feed Sports' Forgotten Heroes. It's a bi-weekly podcast Warren's been doing for a number of years. Lots of great topics and conversations, some really deep dives into things forgotten, including in particular various players and teams and the like. That you just may have forgotten about, but remembered and commemorated in conversation. And again, hosted by our pal Warren Rogan. And of course, his book is a must get. It's called, again, College All-Stars versus NFL Champions, the Chicago Charities Football Games. It is published by our friends at McFarland, and of course, it is available wherever you get your good books, your local independent bookseller, or wherever you want online. Or, of course, if you'd like to click on the affiliate links, either in the this week's show description in your podcast feeder or on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, searching up this episode number 455. Those links will take you conveniently to our friends at Amazon, where you can get the paperback or Kindle versions as quickly as humanly possible, as well as giving us a couple of shekels of referral love when you do so. And it helps keep our lights on. We appreciate that. But however you get the book, just do so. And you will be mesmerized by this now long forgotten yet essential and influential game that was part of the NFL and the NCAA's football history. You can follow Warren on the various socials, and in particular on X, you'll find him at Sports, the letter F as in Frank, Heroes, Sports F Heroes. And you could also follow him on Facebook and on Instagram. Just search up there, Sports Forgotten Heroes. What else? You can follow us on the socials, of course. We're on X as well. We're at Good Seats Still. On Blue Sky, you'll find us at goodseatsstillavailable.com. And just about everywhere else, you will find us, all one word, Good Seats Still Available. Including YouTube, where we stream all these episodes for your convenience as well. Want to send us some email? By all means, please do so. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And our hat tip, again, of course, as we do every week at this time, to our pal Jerry Payne for once again stepping up with some great audio excellence this week. Thank you, kind sir. Thank you for listening. More excitement coming your way in your feed. Stay tuned. See you next week.